I love clothes, and I make some of my own. But even as a sewing enthusiast, I can't imagine the hours it would take to make an entire wardrobe from scratch. But 200 years ago, that's exactly what would have happened. Chances are, if you were a woman in the 18th century, you'd have been pretty skilled with a needle. And if you were rich enough not to have to make your own clothes, you'd still be pretty intimately acquainted with those stitching away on your behalf. In an age where I don't even need to look up from my phone to get ready-made clothes delivered straight to my door, I'm curious how our ancestors managed to whip up an entire wardrobe from just a bolt of fabric and some thread. What skills might you and I have lost to industrialisation? And what personal connections became unstitched when we stopped going to the dressmaker for our frocks and frills and instead turned to fast fashion? To get to the bottom of it all, I've come to De Montfort University in Leicester to meet fashion historian Serena Dyer. Serena is a professor of consumption and material culture in the 18th and 19th centuries. Not only can she talk me through what's changed, but she can also show me. Because right now, Serena is recreating an 18th century gown from scratch. This is how to dress like a Georgian. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Serena. What are you up to today?
We are making an 18th century gown.
Well, please tell me more. What's the gown itself going to be like?
So we're making a sacque gown, which was one of the most fashionable gowns in the 18th century, and we're making it from the 1770s. So this is the most iconic of the 18th century dresses. So people might have this vision of somebody like Marie Antoinette in their mind, with the flowing pleats down the back. That is what we're going for today.
And I'm guessing from what you're wearing right now, which I haven't even commented on, that it's going to be you wearing this gown.
It is, yes. This is not my day-to-day wear, yes. So I am, for once, getting to be the model, the client for this gown. So I've made many, many gowns for myself in the past, but this is a fantastic opportunity to have some of the world's most knowledgeable people in 18th century mantua making, which is the 18th century term for dressmaking, actually make something for me, so I get to be the centre of attention for a few days.
As it turns out, mantua makers were pretty iconic. Before the 18th century, women's fashion was dominated by male tailors. But as this new style of dress took off, making clothes became a trade run by women for women. The mantua design that lends these skilled female workers their name became a popular choice for court dress in England until the mid-century, and was characterised by an exaggerated silhouette with drapes and pleats, all carefully constructed from fine silk. It was so popular, it would go on to influence fashion trends for decades to come.
So what exactly are you making? Are you doing a reconstruction of an existing gown, or is this something new and different?
So this is halfway between a replica and just following rough measurements and rough kind of methods for the 18th century. So the gown is based on a gown that's in the Leicestershire County Museum collection, but we're not replicating it because that gown is just a little bit too small for me. I wouldn't quite fit in it. So we're making it as if we were making it for my body, with all of my body's kind of idiosyncrasies and nuances, but to follow the style and the methods that they used in that original gown.
And so the dresses that we've got in these books here, are these the kind of things that you're going to be making today?
Yes. So there's lots and lots of extant original examples of similar gowns, and they all follow a relatively similar process of construction, but all with slight differences and nuances.
What do you hope that making the dress, rather than, just going to museums and studying them, will teach you?
It has lots of different ways in which it really enriches our knowledge. So one of those ways is that it makes you look at the originals in so much more detail. But there's also lots of these gowns that you can't access just by looking at them. So all those kind of inner seams, how you kind of put together a sleeve, things like that. I think that museum curators were kind of annoyed if we started trying to take apart the original gowns. So this is our way of literally trying to get behind the seams into how those things went together. But you're also learning so much about the process of making and the relationship between the people making the garments and the people wearing the garments.
So we're not just talking about 18th century fashion here. We're really getting up close and personal with the fine stitch of Georgian society. These were generally garments made for elite or genteel people by those further down the social scale. And the very act of mantua making would have fostered surprisingly intimate relationships between people who wouldn't otherwise normally come together. These skilled dressmakers knew their clients' bodies probably better than anyone. We even have records of dressmakers testifying in domestic abuse cases. So these are not just dresses, they're historical records of female connection, and in some cases, friendships.
So talk me through the main stages of the process to turn this into a finished gown.
The first stage is to create a lining on my body. So we're literally draping the bodice shapes onto my body. And then we'll be building the dress onto those bodice shapes. So we're building it literally as a glove on my body, building it all on top of that, and then we'll kind of work separately on different parts of the gown. So like one person will make a sleeve while somebody else is making some trim. And then hopefully all of those components will come together into the finished gown.
Gosh, she makes it sound so easy. But is that really the case?
So Serena's just gone to get changed back into her 21st century clothes. What's going on here?
Well, we've taken the lining that we fit on Serena and we've seamed it together. And now we are putting the back of the gown to fit the lining. And it's 3 panels. So we've got to do a lot of seaming and then pleat all of this in to fit.
So it's a huge amount of fabric that you've basically got to fold up to fit onto the back, right?
Exactly, yes.
So even though you're not doing stitching here, it's still a huge amount of manual, delicate labour. What kind of stitches would people be doing to hold the whole thing together?
There's several different stitches. One of the ones we're using here is we're doing a hem or a whip stitch to create what was eventually called the mantua maker's seam.
So how hard is this to do?
Oh, not hard at all. Anyone could do it.
Even me?
Definitely you.
So can you show me how to do this?
Yeah, okay. So the magic of this stitch is that it encases the raw seam, actually speeds up the process of seaming 2 panels together. So you roll your selvage, or your nicely folded edge in this case, over the top of your raw edge, and you pinch it together, and then tuck everything away.
So it's like super delicate work.
It might look it, but actually when you look at 18th century gowns, they don't look terribly delicately put together.
Why do you think that is?
Speed. So the value of all of these clothes is in the materials. It's in the fabric, it's in the trims and those sorts of things. And it's not in the labour. You as a journeywoman working for a mantua maker wouldn't be earning a huge amount of money, so you have to work fast. Otherwise, you won't be able to pay your rent or buy your daily loaf of bread.
Let me have a go then,
Okay.
and I'll see how fast I can get one stitch done.
Yeah.
So
you just go in a little bit ahead of where you've come out, and then it's like a running stitch on the other side, and then you push it back through.
There?
There you go. That's it.
I mean, that's one stitch.
Yeah.
I can only imagine how long it would take
Well,
to stitch an entire dress.
Yeah, but the thing is that most of the women, or a lot of the women who worked in this trade, had been apprenticed. And there are certain parts of a gown and petticoat which I wouldn't say are less important, but because they take less strain when they're being worn, you don't need to have such considered stitching.
Well, hopefully this is one of those parts. Okay.
Actually, I think your stitch is better than mine.
I still think I should stick to the day job for now.
So, Serena, if you or me had gone dress shopping in the 18th century, what would that process have looked like?
it would be very, very different to going dress shopping today. So you wouldn't go and buy a finished gown. You'd have to go to 2 different retailers to get what you need. So first of all, you're going to go to your drapers, and this is where you're going to buy your fabric. And this is the most expensive part of having a gown made. Once you've chosen your fabric, you'll take that to your mantua maker, and they will make it up for you. And it's a complete custom-made process. You're going to have it made exactly as you want it to fit your body perfectly.
Run us through the main fashion trends of the 18th century.
So prior to the 18th century, almost all women's fashion had been made by men, by tailors. And then this new fashion turns up in the late 17th century for the mantua, which is basically a T-shaped, very loose-fitting gown with some pleats down the back. And tailors decide it's going to be a short-lived, quick phase. We'll let women make that because they're used to making flat-cut T-shaped shifts and underwear, so we'll just let them do that. And then it actually really took off, and the tailors kind of regretted that because it became the dominant fashion for the next 130 years.
So the dress that you're making with your team at the moment, when exactly was it from, and who might we imagine would have worn it?
So this is from the 1770s. So it is a sort of point of transition. It's towards the end of when the sacque is sort of the dominant fashionable style. So the pleats have got a little bit tighter, a little bit sharper. I think they're looking a little bit sexier. I'm a fan of the 1770s. This is also the period where hair is getting higher. It's a very kind of iconic 18th century period. We don't know who wore the original dress that we are recreating. There isn't any provenance that comes with us that indicates that. But it was probably worn by somebody from the gentry, or maybe the lower aristocracy, so somebody that's relatively well off, relatively privileged. But these shapes, these styles, were worn by people across the social classes. And it was quite usual that fabrics and gowns that had been worn by aristocratic, well-off ladies were given to their servants as a gift at some point, and then it would get remade, or it would go onto the second-hand market. So it's not like there is high expensive fashion and then there's this completely separate working people's fashion. There's far more kind of fluidity and flow between the two.
That recycling point is really interesting. I mean, something that we're all concerned with at the moment is this idea of fast fashion and its impact on the planet. And from what you've been telling me about the Georgian period, they were much, much more careful about reusing and using every bit of fabric that they could. Is that right?
Yes, and that's not necessarily coming from an ethical sustainability perspective. That's coming from the fact that the fabric is what is expensive. It is a money point, and you're not going to rebuy fabric if you don't need to. You're going to keep reusing it. And you're also going to use every single scrap of fabric that you have. So the gown that we're making is all rectangles. It's all incredibly efficient. We would now call it zero waste. But it's really taking advantage of every single little piece of fabric that you've spent your precious money on.
So what skills do you think might have been lost today from this move away from dressmaking by hand?
I think it's not necessarily so much about specific stitches or specific techniques, although that is obviously part of it. I think the more significant thing is this intimate awareness and understanding that consumers of fashion in the past had of who was making their clothes, of where it came from, of what it was made from. So I've called this material literacy. So this sort of understanding of fibres, of making processes, which is completely lost today. So most people, if you ask them walking down the street, who made your clothes, they wouldn't know. Or what is your clothing even made from? They wouldn't know. But in the 18th century, that was an integral part of children's education, that they would learn, this is linen, it's made from flax, you can go and buy it at a draper's, and it's actually in children's books from the period. And I think that's really what has been lost in this globalization of the fashion industry today, that this manufacturing is happening overseas, very, very kind of distant and absent, and you don't see what's going on. So you lose all of that knowledge, and that kind of creates this devaluation of fashion knowledge and fashion labor that kind of leads to a lot of the issues that we have in the fashion industry today.
Reflecting on what Serena said, I love making my own clothes. But even I, like so many others, dabble in online shopping every now and again. It's a fast, easy, and often cheap way to stock your wardrobe. But it wasn't always like this. So I'm keen to find out just how much a bespoke and labour-intensive dress like this would have cost back in the 1700s.
So this is silk. Would that have made it a really expensive dress?
That would make it a mid-range expensive dress. We can go higher in our really expensive dresses. Your top range, your really elite, your going to court dresses cost you about the same cost as a townhouse.
Wow.
So that's your really top tier. But they're woven with silver and metallic and gold thread. They can be encrusted in diamonds. We're dealing with a level of wealth on the body, which I think for us is kind of hard to conceptualize. So yes, you have the townhouse level, and this is not quite townhouse level.
So obviously you're not going to want to ruin anything this delicate and valuable.
Yes. So as our process, we think of making as the hard part in the labor, but if you're in an 18th century mindset, it's the fabric that is that's the expensive bit. So in terms of protecting it, you have a number of ways to do that. So and that's where underwear comes in, which is my passion and specialty. So you're protecting the silk that you're wearing on the body with a shift, or a chemise in French, and that is made of linen, and it goes directly on the body. It's almost like a night dress today, and that's going to absorb oil and dirt, and that gets washed, heavily a lot. So that's your kind of initial protector. And then on top of that, you have stays, and stays are the 18th century term for a corset, and that's going to give you the correct shape. And the 18th century isn't hourglass. So the 19th century, hourglass corset. 18th century stays are conical, so they have this very regulated shape that was the fashionable shape to be. And it didn't matter what size you were, because it was all about creating the correct silhouette and the correct proportions. So it's the idea that you're not actually making anything smaller. You're not making your waist smaller. You're just adding volume, which it's all tricks of the eye. So that's why Serena is going to wear these big hoops. And what they will do is make her waist look smaller.
And I'm not seeing any zips, any fasteners anywhere in the workshop. How did this stay on the body?
So it's a really clever invention, and it's using straight pins. So not the type we use today. Again, one of those modern tools that we're using. So not the ones with bobbles. But what she does is she will pin it directly to her stays. So there's a little strip underneath the very expensive silk. So that's part of the lining, and she pins it to that. So she's not pinning herself. She's actually using the baleen, which is whalebone, which is the upper palate of whales. It's where the whales catch krill, and it's about the same density and sort of flexibility as your fingernail. It's that creatine, and that's what her stays are boned with. So she's got that layer of protection. She's never actually stabbing herself.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling extremely grateful about the invention of the zipper. And while it doesn't sound like Serena will be in any discomfort, I'm not sure I could handle the hassle of arranging all those pins every morning. I wonder what else has changed in the centuries since.
So tell me about what you do with this ruffle. So basically these ruffles are kind of easily finished up quite a quick way, and they just are literally pinking the fabric.
So pinking is basically these scissors that have this scallop.
Yeah, so we have scissors now, so what they used to use back then was actually kind of like these chisels with like a shaped bottom edge, so you could bang it through the fabric and create this scalloped ink.
So basically you've got a piece of fabric,
Yeah.
and like a tool, a scalloped edge tool, and then you're fitting it.
Yeah, so literally you'd probably fold up a few layers, have your width to trim, and then you'd have your chisel like tool and you'd bang it through.
But you're not doing that today.
No.
You're taking way too long.
Well, they're quite hard to kind of get made, how to keep sharp. How do they keep these things sharp? So yeah, whereas scissors with this kind of scarf curves easier.
Are there any other tools that you're using that, you know, strictly they wouldn't have had back in the day?
So Garceau in like 60s lists like the dressmaker's tools, and it's pretty much like thimble, needles, thread, you know, an iron, and that's pretty much it. And scissors. So the tape measure, which would be essential sort of modern day dressmaking thing, wasn't really there. They would use strips of cloth or, you know, like tapes to take measure of their client, and then use that on the gown. But we didn't actually have a tape measure.
Which is hard to imagine how you'd even go about doing it now.
Yeah.
They did have scissors.
They had scissors, yeah, they had scissors, and they had obviously these chisels and...
But the scissors weren't quite the same, because we're now using these scissors which have a straight edge across the bottom, so when you cut along the table you can keep them really low and kind of cut smoothly in a line, whereas then they tended to have scissors that had that bulged out on both sides, and these ones weren't invented till the 19th century, so we are cheating a little bit with those as well, not just the pinking shears.
We've just left the team in the workshop. They've been at it for days, but there's still a final few stitches left to do. And being here, it makes me realise how much work goes into a garment like this. I think we see shows like Bridgerton or other period dramas, and you can take for granted all the incredible clothes on screen, but actually the amount of skill that goes into making a dress like the one we've seen today is incredible. And I can't wait to see how it turns out.
With several bolts of silk, countless hours of tireless work, and thousands of stitches, the team have finally produced this authentic 18th century dress, all made by hand from scratch. I think it's fair to say that those Georgian mantua makers would have been impressed.